I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. The 23-player roster for the USMNT's upcoming friendlies was announced this afternoon. The U.S. plays Germany on Saturday, October 14th, and then Ghana on the following Tuesday, October 17th. On today's show, we're going to break down that roster, and to help me do that, I've invited Kyle Bonn to join the show. Kyle is a writer for the Sporting News and has over a decade of experience covering the sport of soccer globally. He also does TV broadcasts for Wake Forest Soccer. Kyle, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Always enjoy coming on. This is a fun window. Last window, the opponents weren't the most exciting, but, we learned some things about the team. This window should be a lot more entertaining with a couple of really good opponents set on the schedule.
Yeah, this is the one I've been kind of waiting for and looking ahead to for a good part of the year. Just can't wait to see how they do against these two very high quality opponents. And then they also have quite a bit of history with both of these teams at the World Cup. So, man, got to start with the big news. I think the big headline out of the roster today is Gio Reyna is back. He was named as a midfielder on the roster. It's the first time he and Greg Berhalter will be back together in camp since their big controversy around the World Cup. Shortly after the roster was announced, Berhalter gave a press conference, and I know you were watching that. Did you learn anything new about the process for bringing Gio back into camp, or what to expect from him in these upcoming friendlies?
I don't think we learned anything new in terms of the relationship with Gio and Greg. I think Greg has been pretty forthcoming in that regard over the last couple of months since his rehire about where they are in that process. I think Greg is understanding that, hey, this is a big story. I'm not going to shy away from it. It's sensitive. So, of course, he's not going to air out everything that they're talking about. And I don't think anybody should expect that. But he's been quite open about where the two of them are. I think it shows a maturity from both sides that, they acknowledge, hey, we understand this is a big story. It's probably really uncomfortable for both of them, but we're not going to shy away from it. Greg's been open about, hey, we've spoken, we haven't spoken. This is how we've spoken. He confirmed today that they spoke over Zoom rather than over the phone or in person. Greg said it'll be different in person once he gets into camp than it was over Zoom. I think they've just been very open about the process, and I think eventually this will come to a close. I think what we learned about Gio's situation is more on the field. Berhalter was mostly asked about, obviously, his relationship with Gio, but he was happy to talk about Gio's prospects on the field, even given just kind of a peripheral question about it. He said that they see Gio in 3 different positions, which was interesting. They said center midfield, attacking midfield, and winger. And then he further clarified that they see him as a between the lines winger as opposed to a winger that's glued to the touchline. He kind of made the distinction between the two. So we learned a lot about how they see him there. And we learned a lot about the fact that it seems like Gio's going to play a good amount of minutes. I think they were cautious. Greg was cautious not to overpromise on how many minutes we'll see from Gio because he hasn't played for Dortmund yet. But it does. He compared it to Fuller and Balogun, which I thought was interesting. He was like, Gio's situation now is basically what Balogun's was in September, where he hasn't played for his club yet. We're just trying to get him on the field, get him going, and then send him back to Dortmund in the best possible situation.
It's going to be real interesting to see, which of those 3 positions that you mentioned that Berhalter does deploy him in. A lot of fans want to see him in that central midfield role like he did in the Nations League final. But that, of course, was BJ Callahan putting him there. I don't think we've seen Greg put him there yet. So that's going to be really interesting to see. If nothing else, you get him back. This first time was going to be kind of awkward no matter what goes on. And so if nothing else, you get him back in camp, get that first encounter out of the way, and then maybe things will start to settle down a little bit. But looking forward to that behind the crest video they put out after this one. And if they
Of the two of them, like playing ping pong or something.
yeah,
right?
yeah, because that's a U.S. soccer production. They're going to try and put some kind of scene in there of those two hanging off the kind of off the field, but we'll see. The other big thing that struck me when I first took a look at the roster was Leonard Maloney. Okay, so just like the last roster, Christopher Lund made that roster, and I had honestly hadn't ever heard of the guy, didn't know really anything about him. And so Leonard Maloney's kind of the same for me. He's a player I don't know a lot about. What do you know about him, or what'd you learn about him, through the press conference today?
Yeah, so, Greg said that Maloney is a hard worker, that he shows a lot of passion on the field. What I'm familiar with for Leonard Maloney is that he's a defensive midfielder, so he's on this roster probably partially because of the injury to Tyler Adams. I wonder if they would have given him a look anyways, even if Adams had not gotten hurt, which is just a brutal blow to that guy who's been just under it, for the last couple of months with how long his hamstring took to even get him back, and then to suffer a setback after finally making his Bournemouth debut. Just brutal for Adams. Hope he can recover. But I think they'll give Maloney a look in midfield. Berhalter pointed out that, and I didn't know this, but he apparently has the greatest distance covered of any outfield player in the Bundesliga so far, which is incredible. But he made the Bundesliga team of the week, I think last weekend. And that's kind of where the noise really cropped up on him making the roster. And then a couple of reports came out that said, yep, he's definitely going to get a look. So not shocking that he was eventually named when it came out, but certainly a player that I think a lot of U.S. fans will want to become familiar with, because if Adams is going to be sidelined for a long time again, which we hope not, obviously, that Maloney could be an option there in midfield. Obviously, you have Luca De La Torre. Not really a true number 6. I think De La Torre is probably best when he's playing the number 8. And then you've got Yunus Musa, who can drop back to the 6 as well. I think that's Musa's best spot for this U.S. national team. He's good as a number 8. He can play out wide. I hate when he does, but he can do it. But I think he's best at the number 6 just because he has really good progression. I don't think the final third is really where Yunus Musa is at his best. So I think keeping him in the center of the pitch is probably smart. So I think if this were a big competitive match, you would see Musa at the 6. But I think given the friendly nature of the games, you probably see Maloney get a look there.
Yeah, Leonard Maloney, Heidenheim. I'll have to see if I can maybe check out one of their games coming up in the Bundesliga. Okay, let's go through just position by position and kind of talk through what some of the key highlights are at each position. I'm going to start at center back. We got Cameron Carter-Vickers, Tim Ream, Chris Richards, and Miles Robinson. Those 4 made the roster. What'd you make of center backs? Do you think Greg brought in the right 4 here?
I do. He made it clear that there are a lot of other guys in the mix. I think he name-checked a bunch of different players. Mark McKenzie's on his way back from an injury. He mentioned John Brooks, which surprised me as a guy who could maybe work his way back into the team. But I think this is the right 4. I think the starting duo moving forward, the best center back pairing for the U.S. right now in the player pool is Carter-Vickers and Richards. I think that's your starting 2. Miles Robinson is probably number 3, and then Ream number 4. We are seeing an expected regression to the mean from Tim Ream. I know fans love him. He's a great player. He's a great guy, and he's a fun story. But he has struggled for Fulham this year, and he's struggled in the last couple of appearances for the U.S. national team too. So I think he's sort of dropping back to where he belongs in the pecking order. He's still a very useful player. He's still capable of starting when they need him. But I think Carter-Vickers and Richards are probably the best 2 for the U.S. at center back right now.
Yeah, you mentioned McKenzie being out, John Brooks being out. We keep hearing rumors that maybe he's going to make it back in at some point, but that's yet to happen. I mean, another guy, Walker Zimmerman, who's been left out. I think last time it was some type of fitness or injury issue. I don't think that's the case now.
He's hurt again. Yeah, they said that he's...
Okay.
Berhalter said that he's dealing with... I want to say it was an Achilles injury or something like that. He made it sound like it wasn't devastating, but that he just wanted to let him figure it out rather than, I'll find what it is, but it was some sort of nagging injury.
Okay. Yeah, center backs, as this U.S. men's national team progresses, up to the Copa America and eventually, the next World Cup, center backs, that's a position I'm really watching because I know you named who you think are the top two at this point, but I still think it's a pretty wide open competition for
sure
who's the starters and who are the four that are going to make this roster. There's a lot of players kind of in play for those
Berhalter
spots
mentioned Austin Trusty as well, who's another guy who
can
kind of weave his way back in if given the chance.
Okay, outside backs. 4 of them were called in: Serginho Dest, DeJuan Jones, Christopher Lund, and Joe Scally. I mean, when I first saw the roster, I was like, okay, is this a typo? Where's Anthony Robinson? But I guess he has an injury as well. What do you make of these outside backs that were called in?
Yeah, so Anthony Robinson, Berhalter said he's dealing with I think he said it was, he gave the official term, and I can't remember what it was. It was something I'd not heard before. But he said it was basically the onset of a sports hernia. So they wanted to give him some time to rest. It sounded like if this was a competitive environment, that maybe he would have been an option. But Robinson has struggled a little bit in the last couple of weeks for Fulham. Not horribly, but he hasn't been at his best. And I think this may be a reason why. So they said, hey, let's just give him the international break off. Probably needs the rest more than he needs the minutes, which is totally fair. I don't think anybody needs to learn anything from Anthony Robinson at this point. And I think it'll be an exciting look at what's left on the roster. I think DeJuan Jones may have hit his peak for the U.S. national team. I'm not really sure that he is anything more than a fringe option, but I think Greg Berhalter's really trying to find the backup to Anthony Robinson and Serginho Dest too. Joe Scally has been good for his club, but also has regressed a bit this year and hasn't really taken his chances with the U.S. He's another guy like Serginho Dest who has to figure out his defensive capabilities. Great going forward, just isn't super duper solid go at the back. I think Anthony Robinson is really the epitome of a two-way fullback for the U.S., and they don't really have anybody else that's great doing both. So I think Scally needs to work on his defensive capabilities if he's to really get, a foothold on the roster long term. Lund was good his first couple times. He's still, a guy that needs looks to really learn what he is. And then Serginho Dest is Serginho Dest, who good for Serginho getting regular minutes for PSV. He's an every game player right now for PSV, which is awesome. He hasn't been that in years for his club. The other two guys, Malik Tillman and Ricardo Pepi, are still trying to find a foothold in that squad. But Dest, from the beginning, he moved to PSV and then 4 days later made his first start and has been a regular since then. That's awesome to see.
Yeah, these outside backs, this is another position to watch closely. I think, Dest and Robinson are kind of firmly have their hold on those starting spots. But from a depth perspective, I've always felt like when one of them comes off late in the game, or if one of them is injured, there's a big drop in quality, and the U.S. just has to kind of change the way they play with that. And so what an opportunity for Lund and DeJuan Jones to maybe have a chance to start one of these big games. Maybe they put Joe Scally in there because I think he can play, both sides, but you would think at least one of the matches, one of those two guys is going to get a start. And if they have a good performance, that's going to be huge for them trying to claim that spot.
I think, when you talk about the drop-off between those two starters, I think U.S. fans need to appreciate what they have in Anthony Robinson. He is, in my mind, the best U.S. fullback since DeMarcus Beasley. And when it's all said and done, I think you will see Robinson up there among the all-time great U.S. defenders. He is just, as a two-way player, it's hard to find somebody better. He is an excellent tackler. He defends one-on-one, and yet he can get forward without sacrificing his defensive capabilities. He's great recovering from being too far up the pitch. I just don't know anything that Anthony Robinson can't do as a fullback. And anytime you have a player like that, of course there's going to be a drop off, when he's not there. So I just want to take that moment to just recognize, like, hey, obviously there's a drop off, and that's something that Berhalter needs to figure out, because you have to understand that any of these players could be missing at any point. That's just the reality of the game now. But also, it's hard to expect anybody to really reprise what Anthony Robinson brings to this team, because he is so darn good. And you look at, not only does the U.S. face a drop off when he's off the field, Fulham have nobody that can fill that role when he's out. So you're looking at a Premier League club that doesn't know what to do when Anthony Robinson is off the field. I mean, he's just an excellent player, and I don't think he gets the recognition quite as much. DeMarcus Beasley's a guy that is in like U.S. soccer lore because he was, he scored a big goal or two, and he was always involved, and he was a big personality, still is on TV. I just don't think Anthony's that kind of guy. He's so much more quiet. And I think U.S. fans don't really understand what they have in him.
Well, maybe after these next two friendlies with him not there, people will start to realize that. But let's go to midfield. We mentioned Gio Reyna. We also got Johnny Cardoso, Luca De La Torre, Leonard Maloney, which we discussed, Weston McKennie, Yunus Musa, and Malik Tillman. This is so the midfield is the most interesting to me, like tactically, like how with Tyler Adams out, how are they going to line up? They called in Cardoso last camp, but he ended up not being able to come because of injury. He's a defensive midfielder. They brought in this Leonard Maloney, a defensive midfielder. Are they going to try and throw one of those guys in there as a lone six, or do you think they're going to do the double pivot with maybe Musa and McKennie or something else?
There are really two options, I think, that Berhalter could pick. I think one is better than the other, but it depends on a couple of different factors. The best trio is Musa at the 6, and then McKennie and Reyna as a dual 8. Or you play Reyna as more of a pure 8 and McKennie as more of a roaming kind of chicken with his head cut off 10 that you kind of get from Weston McKennie. He's such a rare and specialized player. But that will depend on if Greg Berhalter determines that Gio is fit to start. I can't wait to see if he doesn't start against Germany, the just uproar that people are going to have that Gio's being treated poorly by Berhalter, blah, 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 blah. Guys, he hasn't played a minute for his club yet. Let's chill. Obviously, I would love to see Gio play against Germany, and I think he'll come off the bench if he doesn't start. But just let's keep a lid on the expectations for Gio and his minutes in this international break. But if Gio starts, I think that's the best 3. If Gio doesn't start, now you look at, all right, let's put either Maloney at a pure 6 and play Musa at the 8 and McKennie at the 10. Or you get De La Torre at the 6, or you get De La Torre and Musa as dual 8s with McKennie above them in kind of a triangle. Either way, you've got a lot of options. And let's not slight Johnny either, because he's going to be here a while. Fans better get used to Johnny Cardoso, because he is a heck of a player, and he's getting key minutes for a really big club in Brazilian football. That is, I don't think, something that U.S. fans are really used to, because the traditional progression is North America to Europe. But Johnny Cardoso is playing for a really big club and just lost at the final minutes in the Copa Libertadores semifinal in a game that he started. I mean, it's a big deal, and he's a really good player. He's still developing, but he's a guy that's going to be here. Midfield is such a position of depth for this U.S. team, and there's so many options. This argument is a really good problem to have for the U.S., and I hope we continue to have it, because there's a lot of really good players here in this pool.
So what about Malik Tillman? Do you think he has a chance of maybe playing that central midfield role? I mean, he had a really great game with PSV last weekend. Seems to be, I think he's had 2 starts in a row.
Yeah, I even forgot about him there, talking through it. I think Malik needs to show consistency. That's the biggest thing for him right now. I think he's one of the higher ceiling players in the pool, but I think he's got a bit of a gap to get there. And I would be surprised to see him start the game against Germany. Maybe he could start against Ghana, but there just aren't many spots to go around. And I think right now, Malik needs to work on becoming a consistent starter for PSV before he can see a starting spot with the U.S. even in friendlies. I think don't get me wrong. I think he's a good player, and I think he can be an option there. But he's unfortunately coming in at a time where there's a lot of depth. And I think Gio is the guy who Berhalter will want to see at that role before Tillman.
Okay, let's move on to wingers. Christian Pulisic, Tim Weah, Brendan Aronson, no surprises there. Kevin Paredes is the fourth winger brought in. So that's another interesting battle, is who's going to ultimately win that fourth winger spot, so to speak. We've seen Cade Cowell there. We've seen Alex Zendejas there. We've seen multiple MLS guys there. What do you make of Paredes making this roster?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think if I'm not mistaken, Paredes was actually listed as a defender again. He was in September, which is interesting just to see how they see him. But I would be surprised if they play him at defense. I think in September when he came off the bench, if I'm not mistaken, he got his couple of minutes up in the attack. But I think you really see a clear pecking order up there up front. You mentioned, the two guys, Weah and Pulisic, as the clear starters. Aronson in there as well. Aronson struggled early on with Union Berlin. I'd be interested to see where he fits in with the U.S. national team because he hasn't had, too many big moments with the national team either. Just because, really, mostly because Pulisic and Weah have had those two spots kind of locked in. You could see Tillman on the wing. You could see Gio on the wing. There are a lot of options behind those first two guys. I don't really have an idea of where they're going to go right now, but it's pretty clear that there are two starters and then everything kind of falls into place after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cade Cowell, I believe they're going to be naming a U23 roster. Is that tomorrow or in the next couple of days? And I would imagine Cade Cowell's going to be on there. Yeah, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if Kevin Paredes can get some minutes, and he looked good in that. Which game was it against Oman? I think he got some minutes and looked pretty good. And then strikers. So we got Balogun, Fuller and Balogun, Ricardo Pepi. I don't think any big surprises here. There's this narrative that's starting to form that, okay, maybe there is a bigger battle here between these two for that starting spot than what a lot of people thought was going to happen. Do you think that's real, or do you still think Balogun still has a really strong hold on it?
No, I think Balogun has a hold on that spot, as he should. He's the better player. Again, no slight to Pepi, but like Malik Tillman, I think Ricardo has to work on getting a starting spot with PSV before he can get a starting spot with the U.S. He's really starved for minutes right now at the Dutch club. No surprise, he's a young player who just joined, and they've got guys up front who are performing very,
Luke
very
de
well.
Jong, yeah.
And so I think it's going to be tough for him to get a starting spot. He may have to wait a bit, and that's okay. That's just the nature of this game. I think PSV have done really good business, and so he'll have to carve out a spot there. But he's got to do that before he can really be the starter over Fuller and Balogun, who is not a perfect player, has a lot of growing to do, but is far further along in that process than Pepi is.
Tell you what, that goal he scored last weekend looked good. I mean, it was like when I first saw him get the ball, doesn't look like much of a chance, and then all of a sudden in like less than a second, it's in the back of the net. I mean, so I think that's what he can do. He can take those, he can make a chance open up very quickly.
And what's interesting about Balogun too is that I think he's still learning the U.S. and the U.S. is still learning him. And I mean the coaching staff. Berhalter talked in the aftermath of the September friendlies about how they're still trying to figure out how to use Fuller and Balogun best. I think Berhalter is probably, I got a lot of negative backlash, not me, but the comments that Berhalter made on my Twitter feed got a lot of negative backlash. Oh, how does Greg Berhalter not know how to use his best striker. I think what they're trying to do is Berhalter has a clear favorite tactical approach. He's shown a lot more flexibility since being rehired, I think, since the World Cup. But he's gotten praise from a lot of other coaches out there internationally for his press. International coaching is often seen as, hey, you need to adapt to your players rather than the other way around. But I think Greg Berhalter has a favorite way of playing and wants his players to adapt to that. And to some extent, there's nothing wrong with that. I think what Greg is trying to figure out, this is my kind of reading between the lines, is how to meet in the middle with Fuller and Balogun. I think they are both trying to come to an understanding together of how does Fuller and Balogun fit in Berhalter's pressing system and how does Berhalter's system fit Balogun. And when they can find that middle ground, that's where he'll really take off. Ricardo Pepi fits Berhalter's system better. He does the other things like pressing, like hold up play, like finding spaces between the lines better, probably partly because he knows the system better. He's just been in the system longer. Once Balogun figures it out and once Berhalter tweaks his front line to fit Flo, I think you'll see him really take off. And that's going to take a little bit of time, and that's what these friendlies are for.
Okay, and then goalkeepers, maybe the only surprise here is they only brought 2 in versus their normal 3, Ethan Horvath and Matt Turner, so no Drake Callender. Maybe they just wanted to leave him with Inter Miami for their playoff push. Did he make any comments in the press conference about goalkeepers?
No, he wasn't asked about the goalkeepers. I think there was just too much focus on other storylines. I was a little bit surprised to see this, but the goalkeeper position behind Matt Turner is so wide open right now. Zach Steffen is injured. Ethan Horvath isn't playing. Drake Callender has struggled since his last international break. He has not played great. He was playing out of his mind before that September call-up. It's kind of come back to earth for him. And then you've got Josh Cohen, who's kind of sitting out there in the ether right now. There's been some issues with his signature finding a new club. He left Maccabi Haifa this summer. His discovery rights are being basically hoarded by Atlanta United, and they're playing hardball with his discovery rights in MLS. It's sparked a whole conversation of whether discovery rights are relevant anymore. They're not. But he's still trying to find a new club. So he could be in the mix. I think Berhalter is saying, look, we've got 2 goalkeepers. I guess he's probably going to start Turner against Germany and then Horvath against Ghana. That's going to be my guess. He probably wants to get Horvath some time, considering he's not playing for his club. And Berhalter's going, nobody else has it right now. Nobody else has earned it, right? We've got our 2 guys. We've got one against each team. If somebody gets hurt, we've got another. This is a message. Somebody step up, right? And I think in my mind, that's what this is. He could have brought another goalkeeper. He only called 23 players in compared to 24 in September. He could have brought another goalkeeper. So my guess is this is a signal that says somebody else step up. If you really wanted to, obviously this is unrealistic, but really he could have just left Horvath out and been like, Matt Turner's our starter. Somebody else pick, he's got to name somebody as a backup. So Horvath gets the nod. But really behind Matt Turner, nobody has stepped up and picked up that backup role. So I think this is a message.
Yeah, it's too bad Horvath, is, not even part of the team now. I thought he played really well against Oman. I know he didn't have to stop a lot of goals, but his distribution I thought was really good. His movement was really good. Wish that guy could have found a home, and gotten minutes, because I think he is a good goalkeeper. He's had some big moments for the U.S. men's national team before. But yeah, you make some good points about there really not being like a clear-cut third guy right now. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining me today, joining me again. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Before we wrap up here, please direct people to, where they can find out more about you and see more of your work. And then feel free to share any final thoughts you have about this roster or the USMNT. Yeah,
so folks can find me at _bonfire. That's BONN, 2 N's fire, on Twitter and on Instagram. I'm trying to do a little bit more on Instagram, given where the state of Twitter or X or whatever is right now. So feel free to give me a follow in both spots. And check us out at sportingnews.com. The biggest thing that you guys can do is twofold. One, if you ever see Sporting News on your Google search, please come our direction. We do our best to give you a little more info than maybe other folks would. So if you see Sporting News pop up on a Google search, that's where we get most of our traffic. And please do come our way, because I promise you won't be disappointed. And then share anything you like, any content you enjoy, whether it be on social, with your friends. That's always, word of mouth is always appreciated. So I think, Frank would appreciate if you enjoy this show. Please share, because, for podcasts, that is massive. If you've enjoyed this show, please do give Frank and the show a shout out, but also, feel free to share any content from Sporting News or from our socials that you enjoy. That's where you can find us.
Thank you, Kyle.
No problem.
And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a fellow USMNT fan. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on Twitter /X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.